Hello everybody, welcome back to the video, and today I'm going to be ranking the Doctor Who Doctors. So, almost a month ago I did the Regeneration stories, and so now as part of the 60th anniversary build-up that I'm going to attempt to do on the channel, it's time to look at the Doctors. So let's just get into this. So, number 14 is the 13th Doctor, Jody Whitaker. Okay, so recency bias does not play any kind of role into this ranking. The issue is bad scripts. Now, I've really tried to look at just the performances for this. And, okay, this is also the one that I kind of want to go back and watch the least out of these. I mean, there's a couple of good ones. The season 12 opener was pretty good. The Frankenstein sort of episode was good. And the Regeneration story was also pretty good. And I actually liked the Regeneration story. But I mean, yeah, just there are other Doctors I would rather watch. That's really it. Okay, so number 13 is the War Doctor, played by John Hurt. Okay, so he only appeared in The Day of the Doctor, which was a multi-Doctor story. So he doesn't really even get the spotlight in his own story. I haven't listened to the audios. I hopefully will, but I'm just looking at this from the TV point of view. And I actually think he's pretty good. I liked the twist of it being a Regeneration story, but overall, yeah, this Doctor I feel like was only in there because Moffat couldn't get Eccleston to come back. So, yeah, anyway. Number 12 is the 5th Doctor. Okay, this is going to be interesting to see how this goes down. The favorite of the fan favorite, if that makes any sense, is my least favorite classic era Doctor. And that's really only because, while he had 20 stories, double of one I've ranked much higher, Five's issue is he isn't really active in his stories. Okay, there isn't an instance where that's really good, and that's the Caves of Androzani. But that's also his final story, and his best one as well. He does get Urshock, one of the best Cyberman stories, probably, and Resurrection of the Daleks. The most underrated Dalek story of the 80s. So, I mean, there are things to like, especially when he gets a good script. But same thing I said with 13 is there's also the occasional not great script. So, let's move on. The 12th Doctor comes in at number 11. Okay, so I heard a joke or saw a meme where someone said they could do a multi-Doctor story of just Peter Capaldi playing the different portrayals of 12. And you know what? That's kind of true, because you get dark and serious with 8. You get sort of the more goofy, lighthearted stuff with season 9, and season 10 is sort of the balance in between. And while some Doctors can do the balance of dark and goofy, I honestly, personally, prefer Capaldi doing the funnier stuff. Now, for his more dark and serious stuff, season 8 has some pretty good episodes. Mummy on the Orient Express and the really underrated Time Heist. But, I mean, of course, that middle point was the point in which he gave what many people would consider to be the best episode of the show in general, Heaven Sent, and my favorite episode of the era, The Husbands of Her Song, which is a very good comedy. But Capaldi is all over the place, and there's another Doctor a little bit higher on the list that does have that all over the place quality, but it's a clear progression, whereas Capaldi just goes from one extreme to another and then to the middle of both extremes. So yeah, let's move on. Number 10, the First Doctor, played by William Hartnell. Okay, so Hartnell is kind of a difficult one to rank. He was the one that started it all. It's sort of like ranking Sean Connery for Bond. How do you compare the one that started this to where you are now? And ultimately, I thought that Hartnell was, when he was really good, he was really good. But when he wasn't great, it wasn't because of bad scripts. It was unfortunately health complications. But still, he is incredible in several stories. Now, this is one, I haven't seen every first and second Doctor story, but I've seen a good amount of them. Hartnell is very good in the role, and is just great in several stories. The Chase, he's pretty good in. The 10th Planet, when he's around, particularly episode 4, he's good in that one. Particularly his line delivery of "It's far from being all over" was really good. But overall, it's hard to compare him to the ones that followed, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So, yeah, let's move on. Number 9, the 8th Doctor, played by Paul McGann. Okay, so if McGann had more than the TV movie, The Night of the Doctor short, and a brief cameo in 13's Regeneration story, I could see him honestly having a shot at being number 1, because I've listened to some of his audios, and I'm trying not to take those into consideration for most of these, even though I have listened to several, and he is a very good Doctor. But he ranks this low because there's so little of him to judge a performance on. So when you have to think about that, you think, I really can't place him higher than some of these other ones. He has potential, yes, and I can tell that from Big Finish. But ultimately, I wish he had more time on screen. Because if he had gotten a full season, or at least a few more stories, I could see him honestly being number 1. But it's due to the lack of screen time that puts him at 9th. So, let's move on. Okay, so number 8 is actually the 7th Doctor, funnily enough. Sylvester McCoy was really good. And when I was talking about 12 being uneven earlier, I sort of mean the same thing with McCoy, except that's a clear progression from comedic to maybe the darkest Doctor of them all. And season 25 is that perfect balance. McCoy is on top form every story, especially Remembrance of the Daleks. I mean, I don't really have to say a lot about his performance in that one. It's talked about a lot. He's also really good in The Curse of Fenric. And I actually think he's pretty underrated in Battlefield? I forgot what that one's called. Oh, shoot. Anyway, season 26 opener, he's pretty underrated in that one. But when it comes down to it, his biggest fault is season 24. Sorry, I meant to say 26 earlier. His opening season is not the best. It's a fun ride to watch, but I don't think any of those are classics. They're fun, but not, great. So, yeah. 7th Doctor, very good middle season and a maybe stronger final season, but that first third of his on-screen era is what drags him to this position. Okay, so number 7, the 10th Doctor, played by David Tennant. Oh boy, here we go. The fan favorite. The one so popular that technically David Tennant has been the subject of 3 different regenerations. 9 to 10, and then he regenerated into himself. And then 13 regenerated into 14, which is just Tennant's face. I mean, he's a good Doctor. Don't get me wrong. He's a really good Doctor. Particularly season, I'd say 4, but he's also really good in 3 as well. Unfortunately, again, same thing as McCoy, his first season really lowers his ranking. But once you get stuff like The Impossible Planet, that shows his potential in the role. Also stuff like School Reunion as well, but more specifically, The Impossible Planet and Satan Pit. But then, actually, weirdly enough, Tennant's best performance in the role, actually, he's not even playing the Doctor in that one, because that's Human Nature, Family of Blood, in my opinion. His best performance as the Doctor is probably The Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit. He's actually really good in that one. Unfortunately, another thing that lowers it is I do not like his last words. So his last words were, "I don't want to go. No other Doctor reacted like this." And you just don't... To me, it's just sort of... it's Tennant saying, "Oh, you know what? I am hating the fact I'm leaving this role." Oh, I wish that... the end of time clearly seems to be wrapping up this whole ego thing. I kind of wish that it ended there by him saying maybe something like, "I am ready to go." But that's actually what a lot of people think 14's last words are going to be, and I actually hope that's the case. I hope they give Tennant a good regeneration scene to make up for the end of time's disappointment. But, yeah, almost to the top 5, just one more to go. Number 6 is the 11th Doctor, played by Matt Smith. There's a lot that's good about Smith. Season 5 is a strong contender for the best season of the revival. Only in close competition with Season 1, in my opinion. But you also get one of the best stories, actually several of the best stories, in that season. You get the incredible Vincent and the Doctor, and several others. The 11th Hour, probably the best post-regeneration story. I actually don't mind Victory of the Daleks. Time of Angels, Flesh and Stone is actually pretty good. A lot of it is really good, and it gets one of the best Christmas specials in the show's history with A Christmas Carol. So, why isn't he in the top 5? It's because his other 2 seasons aren't the best. Season 6 and Season 7 are kind of iffy. Not as bad as people say they are, but not as good as 5. But Smith is clearly trying to give it his all. But it was also kind of redeemed by The Day of the Doctor as well. So, I feel like putting him just outside the top 5 is the best way to go for me. But anyway, speaking of the top 5, let's get into it. So, number 5 is the 6th Doctor, played by Colin Baker. I actually really like the 6th Doctor. I like the take that they were going with for this incarnation. Colin Baker is really good for the role, and honestly, it kind of stinks he never got a actual regeneration story. I really one day hope I can get that Last Adventure audio drama from Big Finish, because I really want to hear 6's regeneration. If I can't see it, I want to hear it. And he was one of the ones I was most excited to see show up in 13's Regeneration story as a cameo. But ultimately, it's the fact he never got an actual ending that puts him here. He's sort of the Doctor in Limbo, where, oh, yeah, I mean, this could be how you're regenerated in The Brink of Death, I think it's called. I really want to listen to it. But that could be just a parallel universe thing and not necessarily how it actually happened. But Colin Baker is one that I actually really like to watch. He's just really fun. Particularly if I had to pick my favorite story of the era, probably The Two Doctors, a really underrated story, and Colin Baker and Patrick Troughton are actually a really funny pairing in that one. The most underrated multi-doctor pairing, in my opinion. But, yeah, I mean, he's just barely in the top 5 because he didn't get an actual regeneration story. So, let's move on. Okay, number 4 is the 4th Doctor, played by Tom Baker. Yeah, the other most popular Doctor isn't my number 1. Now, Baker was the longest running, but I also feel like that sort of is what's keeping him from the top 3. Because Baker himself said something I kind of agree with, which is he probably stayed on for one season too many. If he had left one season earlier, then you know what? Maybe he would be higher with a respectable 6-season run. I mean, this guy has so many classics to his name. Genesis of the Daleks, Pyramids of Mars, my personal favorite, The Deadly Assassin from this era, The Talons of Wang Chiang, Dark in Space, Terror of the Zygons. There's just so many classics, and Baker is one of the most fun Doctors to watch. But overall, I really just prefer the top 3. So let's get to that. So, 3rd place is the 2nd Doctor, played by Patrick Troughton. Troughton might have had an even harder job than Hartnell, because Troughton had to prove the concept of regeneration could work. He had to prove that the show could live on after Hartnell. And he did so, and then some. Delivering what actually some of the Doctors have said is their inspiration. I think Tennant said that they were all playing basically the 2nd Doctor. But, I mean, this guy has so many classics to his name. Power of the Daleks, not a classic in my opinion. Still a really good story, but it is one worth mentioning. Also, Tomb of the Cybermen, The Invasion, The Faceless Ones, I think is really good. Fury from the Deep, The Web of Fear, The Enemy of the World, and of course, two very strong contenders for my favorite Doctor Who story of all time, The War Games and The Evil of the Daleks. So why isn't Troughton number 1? Simply because I still have some stories left from his era. Once I've seen all of them, which I watched the Wheel and Space Recon on BritBox. I just have the Space Pirates, the Highlanders. Is it just the Space Pirates and the Highlanders? I think so. I think those are the only ones I haven't seen. So once I see those, I will have seen every Troughton story, and he'll probably jump to, if not number 1, he'll at least jump to 2nd. But he is a very good Doctor, and honestly is the reason the show is still going on to this day. But there are just 2 that I personally think were slightly better. Number 2 is Christopher Eccleston, the 9th Doctor. Okay, so the top 2 were extremely difficult for me to figure out because both are performances I really like. Both of them are such incredible Doctors, but I had to figure out which one. And Eccleston was the first Doctor I ever saw. So figuring that out was, I really like this one Doctor. And I actually started watching the show back in 2018. And up until, I'd say, a month ago, when I really sat down and thought about it, Eccleston would be the one I would, if I was asked who my favorite Doctor was, I would say Eccleston. Definitely Eccleston. Because despite him only having one season, there was only one story that I think is not great in that entire season, and that is the end of the world. It's a great regeneration story, very consistent stories, just a great character arc, and obviously the best regeneration story of the revival. So I only prefer one other Doctor. And so, I mean, if you've been paying attention, process of elimination is very obviously gonna say who this is. So let's just talk about my number one. So my number one pick is the third Doctor, played by Jon Pertwee. Now, Pertwee is probably the most unconventional Doctor, right? Because if almost all of them after them are playing some interpretation of Troughton, then Pertwee is sort of the outlier. He is the action Doctor. A lot of people have called him the James Bond Doctor. But you know what? I like spy stories. I really do. So getting this more action-centric Doctor is a really cool thing. You also get some really great stories. You get Terror of the Autons, the Daemons, the Mind of Evil, the Sea Devils. Doctor Who and the Silurians is pretty good as well. Also, Planet of the Spiders is really underrated in my opinion. And, I mean, obviously Inferno. And then, of course, obviously stuff like the Three Doctors. But it is the fact that Pertwee had an incredible supporting cast around him as well that really does help solidify this. As the unit family, as they are called by fans, was the best supporting cast in the show. And you also get the introduction of the best villain in the era as well, with the Master. And obviously, any scene between Pertwee and Roger Delgado is incredible. And that dynamic started with the third Doctor in Terror of the Autons. So, I mean, obviously, I think Pertwee should be my number one. There's no way to deny the fact that, in my opinion, he is the best Doctor. But there you have it. If you feel like you can't decide between all 14 different Doctors, then just leave your top 3 in the comments. But yeah, that is it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you in the next one. Like and subscribe. Bye.